Welcome back, everybody, today to the Rebel Nutritionist Podcast. I have none other than Amanda with me, one of our amazing coaches. So welcome.
Thank you.
I'm sporting the curly hair today because the weather has been horrific dealing with these floods. So I got the natural curly hair going today, and Amanda's doing the wavy thing. So welcome. I'm really excited about today's conversation. I've been hounding Amanda, I think, for weeks to talk about this. And I think it's a great dialogue back and forth. And what are we talking about? So today I really want to talk about our health freedom, our food freedom, and just our freedom in general. And I promise you, this is not going to be political, but really this is going to be all about what is at stake in our environment, in our culture, and really for our planet. And I know it sounds like an out there kind of like heavy conversation, and I don't want it to be. It might end up being because I think Amanda and I are so passionate about this conversation, and because we've been evolving over time with it. I remember many, many, many years ago, it's probably more than 10 years ago, when I lived in Weston and in Florida and had a really beautiful organic garden, and realized at that time, like I had a whole newfound respect for organic farmers, right? Because it is so hard to grow food organically, especially here in Florida. Certain foods, it gets the timing. But the point is that today's conversation is not just going to be about like farming, but really about understanding what is going on with our food system and why are so many people getting so sick. And there's a lot of nuances to that question, and we'll talk about that. And then it goes part and parcel with our healthcare freedom and what's going on in the world of healthcare and how our freedom over choosing how to stay healthy is really becoming increasingly difficult. We're going to talk about why, and that there's just a ton of roadblocks in the way of us really being able to achieve what we want, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to get started. I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a quote, if you will, from Mark Hyman's. He's got a project going on. It's called the Food Fix Revolution, or it's just Food Fix, right? And he's talking about how it's time for a new conversation in Washington. And I really think this is long overdue, but kudos to you, Mark, for putting it out there. And he's talked a lot this week, and I think this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because he's talked a lot this week about how this conversation is not being even heard by our politicians. And they're more few and far between than they are the majority. And how dare you? I mean, like, this is Americans' health. This is our freedom to be able to choose what we want and to have transparency over the food that we are eating. And there's none of that. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like this has to be a grassroots effort in speaking our voices.
Yeah.
And I can't just sit quiet anymore. Not that I have sat quiet, but it's time to bring this to a bigger platform. So what Dr. Mark Hyman talks about his Food Fix program is really to transform how federal dollars are deployed, to really talk about how do we incentivize agricultural practices, nutrition and health practices, because we know, and as he puts it, I quote, "The status quo is not sustainable. We are building a new strategy for healthier food and improved agriculture that will fix our broken food system. It starts by recognizing the importance of treating food as medicine and promoting the practice of regenerative organic agriculture," end quote. So we're going to talk a little bit about regenerative agriculture, what that is and why that's so important. But really, we've talked about, in functional medicine, we talk about food is medicine. Hippocrates said food was medicine. We have come so far from that quote that it's beyond ridiculous. And we know that treating food as medicine manages chronic disease better. It improves long-term wellness. It improves longevity. And we know that our longevity is at stake because our generation behind us is at risk for a shorter lifespan. And that's going to just continue. And not only that, I don't even think it's about a long life. You want to live a long, healthy life, right? So we want to make sure that we're looking at how do we use proper nutrition as a component to help fight disease. So, as he says, as we know, as I have said, as those of us in this space have said, America is in a health crisis. Like we are, and now is the tipping point. And we know it, right? But do you know it? And it's really time to pay attention because our diet is killing us and the way we produce food is killing our planet. So I don't know, Amanda, you read this quote right there. I've taken some of it. I mean, how profound is that?
Yeah, 6 in 10 adults in the United States suffer from chronic diseases. More Americans die each year from chronic disease than from any other cause. In addition to the horrific impact on illness and mortality, chronic diseases are leading drivers of the nation's $3.8 trillion in annual healthcare spending. Wow.
$3.8 trillion in healthcare spending, and we are still one of the sickest nations on the planet. So go figure.
Yeah. Well, and you said something that food is medicine, right? And that's what Hippocrates said, however, hundreds of thousands of years ago. But
I don't know that it was thousands.
Okay, whatever. So that's just dramatic. Okay, I can't help it. But he was talking about food and the way that our earth used to grow food, right? And you talked about a little bit about this regenerative farming, and food used to be medicine. Now the food that we're getting is not even helping us heal and sustain our lives and longevity in the way in which it was designed to do.
Yes.
And so when you said that, it's just like a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like,
well,
I'm doing what it's supposed to do.
Right. So we're going to get to that in a second, but let's just go for a second and really focus on that most chronic diseases. So I've done a lot of research. So I will tell you, things like cancer and diabetes and cardiovascular disease and what we call autoimmune diseases are actually new modern day diseases, meaning these did not exist, back before the 1900s. They just did, or the 1930s even. They didn't exist the way they do now. And it's because of what's going on in the world of food and ultra processing. And it was so interesting because Kirk Hyman was talking this week that there was an article out that and it was in one of the governmental bodies. I don't remember where they were debating this, but the government published a article saying that ultra processed food is not as bad as it's made out to be. And that, the big food companies are behind this, and big government is behind it. And we know that it is the farthest thing from the truth. And so we've got to look at overprocessed, nutrient-depleted food and the fact that we are using pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers. Like, this is a bigger, like I said, bigger conversation. And we've got to start to pay attention to this, and we've got to start making noise and insisting that these food manufacturers stop using this and stop growing agriculture in a way that is depleting our land. And so, again, like I said, chronic diseases could be prevented with healthy diets, good policy, education, and all of that. I mean, the prevalence of chronic disease by improving economic, think about the number of people who are so sick, or they're not productive. The productivity is actually going down in our country because of this healthcare crisis. Yeah. And so how do we restore all this? I mean, we have to start talking about our food supply, right? So let's start there, and then we'll kind of get into the nuances, because we talk about food as medicine often on this program and how we use it, and happy to answer any questions. But if we're talking about food supply, where do we start? Let's talk about regenerative farming a little bit, and we'll start there.
Well, I think we need to talk about why we regenerative.
Okay, there we go. Let's talk about why. So
right?
You can, yeah.
So, we think about industrial farming and industrial, how this all began, and however many years ago, 90, 80, 70 years ago, your neighbor would drop off milk and eggs and cheese, and you would go eat in season, and you would go to your local farm, and that's the produce and the food that you were eating.
Right.
And then industrial farming happened, right? And that's where trouble started.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then, then we're talking about we're adding herbicides and pesticides and weed killers now in the 90s to our crops. And so it's been an evolution of things that have
Right.
happened.
Well, yeah. I mean, it even, not to cut you off, but it even started. So it's interesting. So when you look at them, we'll talk about the few documentaries that we've kind of been watching, but in the Kiss the Ground documentary, again, I'll mention that at the end, but Kiss the Ground is a great film on all of this stuff. And it sort of was my jumping off point to start this conversation.
Mhm.
But the birth of pesticides and herbicides actually came from the leftover poison
Yes.
that was used in the wars. Some of it actually even came from Germany because it was the poison that was used in the gas chambers.
Yeah.
And so that is what was being used to spread on factory farms or agricultural crops to prevent weeds from forming.
Yeah. Right. Agent Orange is I want to say linked to 2,4-D, which is a weed killer, also links to infertility.
Right.
I mean, you guys.
Right. Well, that was the whole thing with, the DDS babies and the, when women who were having babies and exposed to Agent Orange, right? And the DES, sorry, not DDS, DES. And then the, children ended up with cancer, right? Dr. Keneally talks about that because she was a DES baby. And so, lots of conversation around that, but yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
No, but yeah, so it's like, the problem is that for whatever reason, even GMOs, right? Like the origin around genetically modified organisms or crops, right? It all stemmed from this notion of solving world hunger, right? The more crops, the more people are fed, which we know is clearly been debunked since then because there's still a lot of world hunger. And now we have these genetically modified crops. We have all of our crops that are being sprayed with pesticides and weed killers. And we're seeing the impacts of that, right? We're seeing there's a lawsuit right now. There's a current lawsuit in June of 2024 that says 4,285 Roundup cancer lawsuits are still pending today, okay? And that's just people who recognize that there's a link, okay, to their lymphoma or or cancer.
I mean, that's deeply personal for me because, so let me back up and talk about these GMOs and what Monsanto has done and Dow and Bayer and all these companies who are producing this stuff. So a genetically modified organism is basically a seed that has been manipulated in the lab to feature certain characteristics. So, for example, the corn kernel has been infused with different kinds of DNA. And when I tell you different kinds, I literally mean from other things. So, like, there could be a squirrel DNA in there. There could be a worm DNA in there. There could be a foreign chemical DNA. Like, well, the chemicals don't have DNA, but there could be chemical. So, these corn seeds are genetically manipulated in a lab to have traits to fight off disease, to be a certain color, like they can manipulate it to have whatever they want. And so what happens is you plant those seeds and they all also have a resistance to certain weed killers, but not to what is called Roundup, right? So they're resistant to other weed killers. They're not resistant to the Roundup. And so the Roundup is sprayed and it still allows the seed to grow, but it kills the weeds in the ground and kills everything else in the ground, the good bugs and the bad bugs and the good weeds and the bad weeds and everything. So you are left now with soil. So you're left with a corn stalk, but the soil below it has been completely depleted because of the ongoing spraying that happens with these crops. So hopefully I explained it well, but if you go watch Kiss the Ground, they explain it even better and they show it. But what's left is farmland that after these things are harvested is unusable. And so the ground becomes depleted and defunct and it's like dust. And so when it rains, there's runoff. I mean, it's a whole climate mess.
Yeah.
But the whole point of what I wanted to say about the about the Roundup and this weed killer with glyphosate in it is that glyphosate has been proven to be a carcinogen. That is a human carcinogen. It causes cancer. So I had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And look, we know that cancer comes from many different things. But when I was diagnosed, I was 33. I was very, very healthy as far as I knew. I had just had my third child. But I happened to live behind a pretty well-known golf course when I lived in New Jersey. And we lived sort of on the back end of the golf cart course. And I remember smelling chemical. Like there was a pile of like mulch or whatever behind our house. I remember complaining to the township, like, this is not right. It smelled. And I had lived there in this house. It was less than a year at that point. And that was when I was diagnosed with cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma. And we know that Roundup is associated with these kinds of blood cancers, right? Lymphoma. And so when I actually went to make the claim to whatever, to whatever the class action lawsuit of where it is, where whoever you contact, I was asked if I had personally used Roundup. So in order for me to actually make the claim, I would have had to use it in my possession, not just be exposed to it.
Right. And now you'd mentioned the runoff, right? Like think about all of
the runoff from down the hill. I mean, like literally we lived at the bottom of a hill.
Right.
From that, right? And so what was going on with the runoff? We had a pool, right? I mean, it was just my kids played in the yard. We had like who knows, right? And so that's 4,800 lawsuits ongoing as of 2024 for people who were allowed to basically complain. Think about the thousands and the tens of thousands or even the hundreds of thousands of people like me who couldn't even file a lawsuit because I didn't have quote unquote direct exposure.
Right.
So this is much, much bigger than even what is being reported.
And if you think about it, the accumulative, the accumulation, the cumulative effect of consuming products that are sprayed heavily with this, your wheat products, your corn products, like all of those products that are in, I don't know, 80% of the grocery store, and you've been eating it since you were a child. Yeah. What do you think what impact do you think that will have over time? Right. And that's what the problem is with the ultra processed food, with eating wheat products that are not organic, right? And even the organic stuff is now has some traces of it because, they're neighboring farms. And so it's a bigger problem than just, even just live near a golf course or I was a farmer or the cumulative effect.
Right. And, and one of the things, so it's very interesting because then you shared with me, I want to make sure I give her credit, Kelly Ryerson, who is really exposing this whole glyphosate thing. And she was in Washington talking to the FDA. And if you listen to one of her posts, she's on Instagram and she talks about it and talks about the circus that the FDA it was a circus. The FDA is so in bed with these big food companies and these chemical companies, and they're just not listening. And they have their own agenda. And, they were essentially making her jump through hoops and saying that her evidence is anecdotal. There's a ton of studies that prove that these things, glyphosate, cause cancer. And why these lawmakers will not recognize that and pull this stuff, and because there's big money in it, right? It goes back to big money, and so this is why we need these grassroots efforts, root efforts, because we need to speak up. We need to have a voice, and we need to do it collectively because one or two or three of us is not, going to matter. And this impacts your families, your children, yourself. I mean, if you are eating this food, it is, like Amanda said, it is cumulative. And so one day, we wake up and we think, oh, well, where did this breast cancer come from? Or where did this crazy disease come from? It's not just it's partially the food you're eating, but it's the way the food was grown that you're kind of setting yourself up for these diseases. And then if you're eating food that has no nutritional value, like the ultra processed food and fast food and convenience food, even now you're adding insult to injury. So what else did you say?
I wanted to mention that, the other thing that's really corrupt, for lack of a better way of describing it, is that they really, I'm not to be like a negative Nancy here, but the truth is they don't really care about our best interests in terms of our health. They outsource products overseas to Europe, who has more strict regulations in terms of quality and what type of products they can put into their food. And for Kellogg's or Kraft Mac and Cheese, they will change the products that they're shipping overseas to have real food in them versus the one that we see here and our grocery stores. For instance, Kraft Mac and Cheese uses like turmeric to color their mac and cheese, and here they use yellow 6, yellow 7, which we know is a food dye and a food additive that causes ADHD and all these, issues with
these brain issues.
Your brain, exactly. So I feel like the more people hear about this, that I feel like I don't know how you could not feel, outraged by this.
Well, and let's go back to, right, like the Kraft macaroni and cheese.
Yeah.
So if we go back, we know that rates of ADD, autism, attention, children who are getting diabetes and even PCOS, like all of these adolescent childhood issues that we're seeing so much more prevalence can definitely be, look at what you talked about, these chemicals. Well, look at what these kids are eating. If your child is eating macaroni and cheese most days, chicken fingers most days, pizza most days, all of that stuff is so highly ultra processed that there is no nutritional value in that. So if their brains and their bodies need nutrition, right? Food is medicine, and we're feeding them this ultra processed, let's call it beige diet, then what do we expect their brains to be doing? And so I feel like, look, this has to start in our kitchens, and we have to start as parents. My kids fought me for a long time. I mean, on, not having this or not having that. And, I'm always the brunt of the conversation. And they're like, Mom never did, Mom. But my kids are so much more healthier for it today. And so, and it matters. I've talked about it before. They've taken these good habits and are now applying them in their own life. But, right, we go back and look at all these chemicals that we're feeding our children, and we wonder why our children are not as healthy as they should be.
Yeah. But I feel like you have to do even more than that.
Oh,
unfortunately. It's not even a matter of just having healthy habits. It's like, in terms of food, you have to make sure if you're eating wheat, it is organic. You have to make sure when you're eating porous fruits and vegetables that are, on the Dirty Dozen, right? The EWG puts that out every week, the Environmental Working Group. They test these crops every year, and they put out their top list of chemical exposed foods. But you have to do that. And I know that seems extra, and it seems like, oh my God, all my money is going towards food. But unfortunately, that is what we're dealing with here in the United States. So it's not just like, I heard somebody, a doctor, I can't remember her name, the redhead.
Oh, Carrie Means.
Yeah, Means. Casey Means. And she said, like, it's not enough to just say, like, oh, in moderation, we can eat this food. No more, because even the food that we want, even the raspberries that are not organic, are not even, there's no nutritional value. And now you're getting a heavy dose of chemicals on them, you guys. So it's like, this is a big problem. This is a big conversation.
Right. And, for people who are naysayers of organic, like that ship has sailed a long time ago, right? Yeah. And the problem is there are some unscrupulous people out there who will label things as organic and they're not, right? But we hope, you got to hope that when something is labeled organic, that you're trusting the farmer that you're getting it from or whatnot. But the issue is, because people say, well, I can have a banana that's not organic because you take off the peel. Okay, listen, people, everything grows in soil, right? If it's growing in the soil and the soil is treated with these herbicides and pesticides, guess what? Your banana is going to be contaminated with herbicides and pesticides because the roots have to soak up that stuff. And so, and then people say, well, it's expensive. Here's the reason it's expensive, because commercial and industrialized farming is subsidized by the government. Organic farming is not subsidized by the government yet. We need loud enough voices to say, let's support our organic farmers. Let's get into this regenerative farming. We're going to talk about what that is. But let's make our voices and our dollars. Like, this is about, where do you spend your money? There's a reason that Costco now has there's an abundance of organic food, because people have asked, and they're delivering, right? So vote with your dollars, because that matters.
Totally.
And so, yeah, it is important. And it was interesting in that excerpt that she did, that Casey Means did, was about the spinach. And she talked about that, why do we want to have local and organic? Because as soon as that spinach was picked, or as soon as anything, a tomato, a grapefruit, a banana, whatever it is, as soon as it's picked off of that plant, it starts to die, and the nutritional value starts to become depleted. And so she had mentioned, it was a pretty poignant piece on the spinach, right? It's on Instagram. But that like, there's almost, by the time the spinach has been sitting on the grocery shelf for 2 or 3 days, that it's traveled, right? Because it's like the average mileage that it is from farm to grocery store is like 1,500 miles. So by the time it was sitting in the grocery store for 2 or 3 days, there was like 0% of vitamin C, I think is what she said. 0% of vitamin C.
Yeah.
So, the other misnomer is we think we're eating, healthy fruits and vegetables from the grocery store. And are we really eating the nutrition that we should? So it becomes a little depressing, but this is why I have like that tower garden in my backyard of, like, how do we start to get and support ourselves and grow our own food when we can?
Yeah. Or you look into your local food co-ops, or
Yes.
I know in South Florida, in Miami and in Broward, there's quite a few that you can get that deliver you from their farm. So that the carbon footprint is low, that you're going to get food that's been picked within, a few days, maybe hopefully the same day, to kind of, go against that notion. Because that was really disheartening.
It was very disheartening.
Not going to lie.
No, it was very disheartening. I was very happy when I looked in my backyard after that. And I have, so in Florida, in the summer, you can't grow much other than, now I have these like 4 or 5 different varieties of spinach and herbs, right? And so I was so excited. I'm like, I went out and like cut my spinach, and I'm talking to my spinach like, please keep growing, please keep. Because now I have all these varieties of spinach that I know are going to give me my vitamin C. So again, right, the health freedom or the food freedom in knowing that if you're growing your own food. And like Amanda said, there are these co-ops, but like, wouldn't it be great to start creating community gardens? They're doing it all around the country, even all around the world. But like, how great to have a sense of community, grow stuff and reap the benefits of that, and be able to live off of your land, so to speak. So I think that's a pretty important, conversation too.
Totally. Well, let's talk about, maybe you can shed a little light on the significance of having regenerative farming, because I do think there is light at the end of the tunnel, because this is like very gloomy and dark and like very, I like curse every time I hear a study, and I'm like, I get so angry. But I do think there are things shifting and in the right direction.
Right. Well, and people like Finian Makepeace and Ryland Engelhardt, they did the documentary Kiss the Ground. They now have another documentary coming out called Common Ground. And these guys they started the movement. I don't even remember when Kiss the Ground came out, but they've really spoken out about, very, very verbal about the regenerative farming movement, as is Dr. Zach Bush, who's really taken a huge effort and a huge stance in the regenerative farming arena. And what does it mean? It means allowing the earth to grow and regenerate itself so that we can have crops, whether it's year round or seasonal, that produce food and soil. So really, it is about the soil. It's about regenerating the soil, because the soil is the lifeblood of this planet. And when you listen to how important it is for the carbon footprint, like, the more farmland that we can regenerate and create, the more carbon we pull out of the environment. And one of the things that was really sad in the Kiss the Ground documentary is that we had the opportunity in 2015 at the World Summit, to make an impact in this, and the United States just completely opted out of that treaty, which is mind-blowing to me. So if you really, like Amanda said, like our government just has no desire to keep us healthy. It's more about how sick can we make you and keep you, and just keep you, uh, uh, stuck on the pharmaceuticals, addicted to the pharmaceutical medication, so that these companies can just keep making money. It's just about them making money. So, and the other sad, really kind of frightening thing that I heard is that we only have 60 harvests left before most of the cover crops in this world are depleted. 60 harvests. Like, that's not a lot, people. So what is regenerative farming? Like I said, it's like creating the soil, and there's methods with creating cover crops, and there's a whole process to it. And it's about regenerating the land. Whereas the conventional farming, the way it's done now, all they do is deplete the land, and they till, and they just get as much as they can. But now these sections of farmland are left barren and just unusable. And now, and farmers, there's actually a huge issue with farmers. They're losing their land, and the suicide rate amongst farmers is tremendously high. It's very scary because their livelihood, and it's not just theirs. This has been, so many of the farmers, I don't know if you guys realize that the farmers in this country, this has been generational. It's generation after generation after generation. And now they're coming to a point in time where they cannot sustain this. And it's big government who came in and said, you need to use our seeds or else. So they're sort of being stuck, pinned between a rock and a hard place, because they don't have the money to spend on now creating this whole new system. And the government sort of pinned them up against, you got to use our seed or else, right? And so it's a pretty tenuous place for these farmers to be. And so, but the light at the end of this tunnel is there are farmers who are doing this. And again, in Common Ground, you'll see this, and in Kiss the Ground, you'll see this. And Zach Bush talks to all of these farmers. I'm like, I'm going to make it to one of these farms these days. That's what I keep saying. I want to get there and document it, right? Because this is how we are going to save our planet. This is how we are going to save the environment. This is how we have to save ourselves.
Yeah, and this is how we're going to reverse this whole fertility issue that we have going on.
Well, we're seeing, look, it's the health crisis. We're seeing, chronic disease. I mean, forget about what's gone on as a result of things like COVID, the vaccine. Again, that's a whole other story we'll get into at some point, because we're seeing lots of information come out about that.
Yeah.
But then how are we supposed to heal from these things if we're not feeding ourselves good food? Because pharmaceuticals are not the answer.
No.
The Band-Aid to the symptom. And we're seeing people sicker and sicker younger. The rates of cancer in our younger generation is staggering.
Mm-hmm.
And then and we're not going to be able to reproduce as a society because infertility. What was the headline that the Chris, I forgot his last name, the Chris Buchanan.
Yeah, this was a
just had a
PubMed study. Yeah, so French infertility clinic found glyphosate presence in human sperm. They found that over 55% of sperm samples contain high levels of glyphosate. The research also found evidence linking glyphosate exposure to DNA damage and oxidative stress in semen plasma, further suggesting its detrimental effects on fertility.
Right. Like we needed a study to prove that, but I mean, sometimes you do, right? People just need to read it somewhere for it to sink in.
Yeah.
So we're seeing rates of fertility decline, and it's from our environment, and it's from all these chemicals. I mean, the number of chemicals that are in our environment is staggering, like staggering. So they've taken the cord blood from babies that are just born, and they test it for chemicals. And I want to say now we're up to, I think we're close to 200. I think it was like 190 chemicals that were found in cord blood. So now babies are coming out already toxic, right? And that burdens the liver. Like we talk about the systems in our body. When people say to me, oh, I'm having a hard time losing weight, or, oh, I don't feel well, I have fatigue, I have brain fog, I'm having hormonal imbalances. We're seeing endometriosis and PCOS in younger people at earlier and earlier stages. Guys, this is from the environment. And this is from the environment kind of latching on to things like toxins in our liver and toxins in our brain. And if we don't get those out, if we're not detoxing that stuff, it's like sludge in our bodies. So I often say, and this is sort of this is a great depiction. I don't love the imagery, but it works, right? So when there's an oil spill in the ocean and all that oil ends up on shore and you see the animals covered in oil, and now all these great people who come save the animals have to get rid of the oil, like they just have to like layer by layer of oil. Think about that in your liver. Like that is what's going on. Your liver just gets coated and coated and coated with this sludge, and we have to get rid of it. And it takes time. And then, oh, by the way, if you're eating seafood that's got mercury in it, right? Like all the tuna lovers out there, my children included, sometimes I had to yell at my son the other day. I'm like, what are you eating tuna? You know? But the fish, the big fish that have mercury in it, again, overburdens our liver. So becomes a huge problem. So the food supply, our food supply really needs to be front and center. And we need to be, as Mark Hyman says, fixing it. Yeah. What else do you have on there that we need to talk about?
No, I think we kind of hit all of the important things here. You know, I think there's so much power that we have that we're not harnessing or utilizing because we don't know where to start. But I do think like a good place to start, like you said, is voting with your dollars.
Yep.
That I think is most important, because if your bottom line is being impacted, you are going to change what you're doing, period, end of story, or they go out of business. So voting with your dollars, choosing really good quality brands that have integrity, that are, you know, and the brands that have integrity lets you know they're proud of all the things that they do. And it is front and center in the front and in the back and in their story.
There's full transparency, right? And so we'll start to, I think what we need to do is start to create a resource page. It's also part of our membership, which is why I am putting it in there, our little membership. But this is the benefit to you guys of having a membership with us, is that all of this information that you guys are out there searching for on the internet and not sure, you know, on TikTok University, like everybody's trying to grab pieces of information. Guess what? Like, this is what we do. We can help you with this. And it's part of the membership that we offer. So we're going to add this resource page of these companies that are doing good, sustainable work, you know, to what we're doing. But it's so true, right? Like these companies that are doing this have full transparency and are stating what's on the label. And if you guys don't read ingredient labels, read them. If there's chemicals in there and if there's things in there that you don't know, A, how to pronounce them, or B, what they're for, like all these gums and chemicals and flavors and things like that, like you don't know what's in there, you should not be buying it. Yeah. Because if you don't know how to read it, if you don't know how to pronounce it, guess what? Your body does not know how to use it.
And by reading ingredients, that means you're flipping over your product.
Right.
If it's in a box or it's packaged, right? You're flipping it over and you're looking at the ingredient label. You're not looking at the food marketing that they get paid the big bucks to try to get buzzwords to get you to buy their products, okay? You want organic as much as you can afford to do. And even if you think you can't afford it, honestly, do a price comparison. And a lot of the time the conventional matches very similar to the organic stuff. So I would say prioritizing that is going to be super important, especially with your wheat products, guys, especially now that we know glyphosate is wreaking havoc, right? And so many systems in our body. And even there was just a study that came out that Bonza, that very well-known chickpea pasta. I'm guilty. I bought their crust for pizzas, and I'm a little upset about it because that was probably one of the only gluten-free crusts that I really liked. And now I will no longer buy it because they have the highest level of glyphosate ever detected, right? So there's this brand called, or I'm sorry, not this brand. There's a nonprofit organization called the Moms Across America. And if you're not following them, support their movement. They're doing amazing things. And they test a lot of these gluten-free products, and they found that Bonza had the highest, highest level of glyphosate that they've ever detected out of however many hundreds of studies they've done. So that is alarming.
Right, because that's chickpea, right? So we know legumes are also sprayed. Yeah. So if it's not organic and if it doesn't say GMO free, right, on the label, GMO, genetically modified organisms, if it doesn't say that on the label, then you can be sure you're getting glyphosate. So when people say, well, I can't afford organic, here's what I'm going to say to you. Okay, well, can you afford getting sick? Can you afford triggering, right? Cancer gets triggered somehow. And I am telling you that I know mine 100% was triggered in some way by these chemicals. And so we can no longer say and live in denial like That's not going to be me. That's not going to be me. Because I have news for you. By 2050, they're predicting that every single person on this planet will have had some form of cancer. So if you want to save yourself and you want to save your children and future generation from these diseases, we have got to start acting now. And as Amanda said, reading the labels, ensuring that, because now, again, the good companies have full disclosure. The not so scrupulous companies are hiding this stuff.
Yeah.
And so you got to go find it. And they know most people, not us though, but most people will not look. And so again, this is why you rely on experts who are doing the work in the industry and doing the work in the field and doing it with integrity to help you.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, so important. Yeah, I think, look, we can go on about this, but we're really saying the same thing. And I just think that we can no longer keep our heads in the sand about any of this because it's become very real and very scary and too important for us to not be sounding in the alarm on anymore.
Totally. Yeah, I agree.
And so, yes, go follow those people. Go look at the documentary, Kiss the Ground. Follow Zach Bush, these moms across America. If you want more information, we've got lots of it and can help you, maneuver your way. But so this is the first conversation of this kind that we are actually having. It will not be the last. Trust me. We are going to continue to be vocal about it and support those people around us. We have an amazing, actually, nursery near us. It's called Tree, TRE, Tree Amigos Growers. I talk to them all the time. Jason Long, who is one of the owners, is a phenomenal guy. And they're actually doing workshops on creating cover crops and having these conversations about regenerative farming. I think I'm literally there every week. I just go to talk to him. I'm like, dude, I can't even get him on the podcast. He's like, I'm so busy. So I'm going to keep bothering you. You got to come on the podcast. But he's a wealth of knowledge about, what our land should look like, what our farmland should look like, and how we get back to that. So I will keep doing my tower garden until I have a garden that I can actually grow again in a house. That is a goal of mine. And, it's one little plant at a time, one little crop at a time, and keep supporting these efforts because it's really about saving ourselves.
Yeah.
And this planet.
Yeah.
All right. There is light at the end of the tunnel, people. We need you to take action too.
Yeah.
So with that, anything you want to say?
No, I think you summed it all up. No.
Awesome. Thank you for listening. As always, make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe. Check out our membership. And this is your Rebel Nutritionist signing off. Make it a great day.